Welcome, everybody, to the Indie Game Lunch Hour. Today, we're talking with Ryan Grady on creating on a budget, how indie artists are redefining visual art.
The Indie Game Lunch Hour.
In our live magical podcast, we give game developers the chance to hear stories of breaking in from industry experts, as well as directly ask them questions about their areas of expertise in the second half of each episode. As always, I'm your host, Willem Delventhal, the founder here at the Indie Game Academy, and joining me today is Ryan Grady. Ryan is both a professor at IGA, as well as a professor outside of IGA, as well as an accomplished illustrator and artist in the game industry, and she is joining us today to talk about creating on a budget, something that I know all of you indie developers care a lot about. I care about it myself too. Welcome, Ryan. What are you having for lunch today?
Hopefully Korean barbecue. Hi, everyone. So excited to be here.
Amazing. Where's the Korean barbecue coming from exactly?
We get a food truck every day here on campus. And so we have this bulgogi food truck that is everyone's favorite. So
Wow.
I'm doing that right after this podcast.
That is a pretty great perk. Is it there like all day? Have a set number?
It has a set number of hours. So it goes away at 2:00. And when you teach 11 to 2, it's a sad day. But
Wow.
today I get to have some.
Amazing. All right. We'll get you through this quick then so you can get out and get that food.
No, I'm excited to talk today.
Amazing. So you are currently a professor at Wake Technical Community College. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Amazing. And you are also a concept artist at large in the game industry.
Yes, like my most recent project was working for Studio Hermitage and the game is called Our Brilliant Ruin. I have the pretty embroidered book, which you can't see because of my background. And it's a TTRPG, but one of the things that's cool about that company, they actually are a multimedia company. So some of my work will be in comic books and the video game they're working on. They just did a big podcast series. So that's one thing that's cool is all of that stuff that I worked on for that gets to be a part of many projects.
That's awesome. I have, it seems like in the indie space, actually, the multimedia release strategy has been a lot more popular the past the past year or two. Good friend of mine, for instance, is releasing a movie, an hour and a half long movie alongside his game, which is pretty wild. A lot of work.
Awesome.
Yes. Yeah. We'll see how it works. I'll report back to you if it works for him. All right. So the first question we generally ask on this podcast is for the origin story. So Ryan, tell us about where you are in the game industry today and how you got there.
Well, for one thing, I have actually been teaching simulation and game development at the college level since 2016. So I've been industry adjacent for quite a while. And I was able to work on some cool projects before then too in grad school, but like pretty much immediately went to simulation and game development, which allowed me to do two things. One, I had lots of flexibility, so I was able to pick up contracts. And that's one thing that I encourage you if you're breaking into the game industry. A lot of stuff is gig based. Contracts are where it's at. And it also allowed me to meet a lot of people. So from day one, just teaching simulation and game development, I have my department head worked at Ubisoft for forever. Like his title of shipped games is astronomical. My colleague across the hall worked on Colossal Cave on the new remake for VR. So I was able to meet all these different people. And I worked on a couple little things, like I was a 3D artist for this game called Curse Chasers. And I also got to do these things called externships, which is where our department will actually send you back into the industry. So I got to do a lot of 3D stuff, like these little 3D reverse internships in the industry, which was really cool. But for me, that Studio Hermitage concept art position, especially because it was a 2D position, concept art and illustration's my truest love. To me, that's like the thing I'm the most proud of that's not my own game, right? To me, that's the big, like, I'm a real concept artist. And I got that because at this big game conference, the East Coast Game Conference, we were Wake Tech had a booth there. My department head worked with all these people that were starting this new indie studio. Were all coming from these big name studios like Funcom, Epic, all these different Ubisoft, all these different places starting their own indie company. And I actually talked to a human being. I saw they were hiring for a concept artist, messaged the guy starting it on LinkedIn, one of the guys starting it on LinkedIn, talked to him at the East Coast Game Conference. He viewed my portfolio on my iPad and scrolled right there in the break room, which was crazy. And like that ended up just opening a whole lot of opportunity. And that's how I got my little break in. Or at least got some pieces. Like we always say, break into the game industry. I feel like it's more like grabbing a puzzle piece each day.
Yeah, I think one of the misnomer that breaking into the game industry gives people is that once you've broken in, that's it forever. Like, well, now you're broken in, and it is a lot easier to land new jobs once you've had your first one, for sure. So you do, tend to stay in, but it's always a process. It's always you looking for the next gig. It's always you looking for the next job. It is one of the really unfortunate side effects or negatives of this industry that term lengths tend to be very short. It's seemingly leaning more into contract work, like you've mentioned lately, and especially into the future, I think. So people will be working for a couple of months, 6 months, 8 months, and then looking for the next thing. And it's sort of always breaking in again. I've done that myself a couple of times.
Right. And I really hope, because one of the things I love about our industry is we're a little new. I mean, and you
Mm-hmm.
even think about film. Film is only 100 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe 120, but still. And that's our sister industry that we look up to when we're like, what are you doing film? We want to do stuff like that too. Though now they're envy of our Unreal Engine and all sorts of cool stuff. But if it's a creative based industry, it's gig based. And I really think that the game industry, especially as more indies pop out, can start to figure out how can we be more permanent.
That's a big one. Before we jump into that, because I think we can talk about that a lot,
I
let's get to
know.
the topic. And I think people will want to, so let's touch on it at least. But first, let's get to our topic of the day. So, creating on a budget, how indie artists are redefining visual art. You told me in the little warm up that you were excited by some of the new tooling and some of the new processes that you are seeing in the industry. So, tell me a bit about that. Most of the listeners to this channel are indies. They're either actively working in the indie space or they're planning or dreaming of launching a studio one day. So how do they redefine art on a budget?
So I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the fact that, hey, Unity, I can make an account, I can use it, let's go. And Unreal also is accessible now too. You make a certain amount of money. You don't have to pay until your game makes a certain amount of money. But those are just engine based, right? That's not creating art. And a lot of people go to Blender for their in all be all because Blender is open source, it's free. You can do everything in it from 3D model to texture to sculpt to render, all to rigging, all of those different 3D disciplines. Well, one, y'all, like I said earlier, concept and illustration is my truest love. And the quickest way to come out with your ideas is that sketching early pre-production work. Pre-production is a huge part of the process that I think sometimes gets overlooked. And if you're making environment concepts, Blender's great because 3D modeling is great for that, but you still need to do paint overs. Blender is not the best texturing tool out there. And I think another thing that we need to consider is a lot of you probably have other jobs or other gigs that you're doing while you're working on your game because it takes a while to get a game off the ground. It takes a while to start. Like I'm working on my own indie game right now as well, so I know how it goes. And with your budget also comes portability, being able to work at any time, anywhere, even if it's just for 10 minutes. time is part of your budget. And Blender is not always going to be accessible at any time, anywhere. So one of the things that has really revolutionized my process, and actually was part of my process for every gig, is being able to create all of my concept art on my iPad, right? And I use Procreate, which is what, $14.99 versus let's talk about Adobe products for a second. So,
Uh-oh.
like, let's talk. And before anyone jumps in about Affinity, I'll mention Affinity Designer and all that. But the thing about Adobe products, if you are not a student, you have to pay $60 a month to be able to use Photoshop, Premiere, After Effects, all of these things beyond just the game engine and beyond just creating 3D assets that you'll need to make a game. That's a lot of money. I mean, if you're a student, it's $20 a month, and my students complain about that being a lot of money, especially with how many subscriptions and streaming services and all that we have to pay for in our daily lives. So anything with a flat fee, I find preferable. Procreate, $14.99 flat fee, does just about everything what that Photoshop does, and actually has better drawing tools in there. You can also texture 3D models with what's called a physically based rendering system. And if y'all are not familiar with that, physically based memory rendering basically means that you can make it look really metallic and shiny versus just shiny, like we used to back in the PS2 days. And Procreate lets you do that on your iPad. So you could be sitting on a subway and texturing a 3D model, and it's very intuitive, much more intuitive, if I may say, than Blender's texturing process. But the thing I'm the most excited right now is I've been using Nomad Sculpt on my iPad, which is also a similar price point. It's around $15-ish. And it's pretty darn good. I can make an OBJ, I can make a high quality sculpt, I can export it out. But as of right now, the real only advantage over using Nomad Sculpt over Blender or something else is that it was portable. Well, this past year, Maxon has released ZBrush for the iPad. And for those of you who are not familiar with ZBrush and why ZBrush is important, like why can't I just sculpt in Blender, or what is sculpting? Basically, when you're making 3D models, you have your little regular 3D models that are polygons, and it's low poly, and it can run on a really low power machine. It can run on a dinosaur computer. But you'll make this beautiful high poly version with buttons and stitches and sculpted muscles and all this fancy stuff that you actually bake. Like, you put it in an oven and you bake it digitally onto that low poly model. And it basically, you can make something that looks like a beautiful muscle man, and it will run on your iPhone. Game developers have been figuring out how to make things beautiful with like minimal technological capability forever, and we get better and better at it. And ZBrush is the industry standard for those really pretty sculpts for map baking. Right? Well, before Maxon purchased ZBrush, which was a recent occurrence, owning ZBrush, the education version, was $700. Now, Maxon has changed that, but if you have an education version, you can't use that to make things for profit. So even if you're just selling things on a marketplace, you can't use any of your education software. So how can you use that as an indie developer? Well, the iPad version is only $9 a month, $80 for the whole year. And it just does it just about does everything, including retypology things, which is how things that will dynamically make your mesh functional and not like break anytime you animate it for $90 a year. That's nuts. And I've been using it for the past 3, and they have a free version, but the free version you might as well use Nomad Sculpt. It's not good. It doesn't have all the functions you need. But the like being able to I'm on the $9 a month plan right now, and I can tell you that I have increased my productivity exponentially because now I can do it on my iPad on my 10-minute breaks. When I finally get home and I've been sitting at a computer all day and I cannot sit at a computer again. I need to make art on my sofa.
Hmm.
Um, and my students have actually been using it as well some because Maxon couldn't do their educational license. They were down for 3 months.
Hmm.
So I think that's really changed the game. And one of the things I'm so excited about, there's not a great option for 3D modeling on the iPad. Blender,
Mhm.
come out with with an iPad. But there's this brush in ZBrush called Z Modeler, which basically allows you to do any type of 3D modeling tool, whether it's extrusion, whether it's inset, bevel, you name it, they got it in the form of a brush. But it's only on the computer ZBrush. Except they announced that this April, so any day now, that's going to be available on your iPad
For Blender?
for ZBrush.
Oh, for ZBrush. Okay.
So that means that starting there actually is going to be a way to make low poly models on for a very low price. Like I know Blender's free, but anytime we have an option of a new 3D software that's affordable, that's exciting too.
Hmm.
And so if there was a game like just with iPad software, let's say you have what? Let's just say you're making a really small 3D game for a game jam. It's a 3-month game jam. You could do it entirely on your iPad up until the game engine point under $100.
That's pretty interesting. So a lot of these tools, a lot of the stuff that people start with are the free ones. So they'll go and grab Unity, they'll go and grab Blender, and that makes a lot of sense before you're sort of committed. Before you're like, okay, yes, I really care about 3D modeling, or I really care about texturing, or I've really found a love for engineering in games, whatever it might be. Makes sense for you to play with those free tools. You've mentioned here, though, a couple that are pretty close to free. $9 a month is affordable, $15 is affordable, but are potentially a step above those free tools. It seems like the biggest reason that you're excited about ZBrush and Procreate in particular are because you can use them on the iPad. If not everybody here is going to be an iPad owner, would you still advocate for those tools if I'm just working on a PC or a Mac, or do you have other tools you may advocate for in that case?
So I do advocate for the iPad pretty hard, and here's why. Um, when you are an artist, whether you're a 3D artist, 2D artist, UI artist, technical artist, whatever your title is, you're going to need something that uses pen pressure. The artist hand still exists in the digital world. So what we do when we're working in 3D or 2D, making art digitally, we use something called a drawing tablet or drawing display. With the leading technology company in that line is Wacom. Now, a Wacom 24-inch drawing display that will work with your fanciest PC, your Mac, any kind of computer you got. That ranges anywhere from $600 to $4,000.
Whew.
Now, I saved up and I got the fancy 24-inch. And that's a little bit over $2,000 machine. But it's a fancy drawing monitor that you can draw on. That's a lot of money. Um, And one of the things that I have issues with all drawing tablets, whether it's Wacom, X Pen, which is what kind of the next step. X Pen's pretty awesome, and they are much more affordable. But you have all these other little companies underneath that are adjacent to Wacom that are a little bit more affordable, but still pricey. And all of them use a pen like an ink pen. And the problem with that is, and all of my traditional artists will understand this, is that the ink pen is not really ergonomic for all type of art making. It is confines you to using your wrist, which is not good for you, and it also gives you a whole lot less of control. You're really supposed to draw with your shoulder. It gives you more control, and it allows you to vary what that whole machine is built for anyway, pen pressure. So the iPad comes with all that software as a self machine, and even more importantly, it has the Apple Pencil, which is, to me, the game breaker. It allows you to use the side of your pencil like traditional drawing. So artists moving from, I have a lot of young artists that only drew and are moving to digital art for the first time. And so that allows them to go almost directly from drawing on paper to drawing on a screen. And that's the whole reason why I am hyped about the iPad. One, it saves me time. Portability is really important. And it allows me to draw more ergonomically, giving me a power that I feel is comparable to my Wacom tablet.
One of the things that I love about doing this show is that we wind up talking about things here that I never would have expected to talk about. So so us talking about pen pressure and how much that matters and why the iPad is actually a fairly budget-friendly option as a result of the other options that are out there is pretty fascinating. That's not something I think I ever would have really touched on. I'm a game designer, so I don't spend a lot of time. In fact, out of all the things that I can do, art is one of the ones I can do the least. So this is a place that's foreign to me. It's interesting to hear about it. I'd love to get, we mentioned very early on, this shift, and not really a shift, especially artists and like audio folks will be very used to this, but the gig economy we seem to be moving into, where we're getting much more short-term contracts rather than full-time employment. Full-time employment still exists. It tends to exist at larger studios more than anything. Can you tell me a little bit about the future as you see it for the game industry, for artists and other game developers at large, in this potential gig economy, and how we might prep for it as individuals?
Well, my question is, are we going to see a return? Like, what I really wonder for the future, are we going to see a return of the generalist? Because in the past couple of years, my pre-production has always been pretty much gig-based, but you have some things called art houses, which I would love to see more art houses pop up. But what an art house is, and an example of one would be Aquatic Moon, or what's the other one? A Tomahawk, which actually has some videos on ArtStation about like concept art, pre-production, environment design, all that good stuff. Their whole thing is they just have set in concept artists that the companies will hire out. And I do think we'll see a lot more of that. Especially, I'm so exhausted by the conversation about AI, but it can't be avoided. I know.
We can talk about that too if you want. Get a little spicy.
One of the things that I'm going to say is I'm not too stressed about AI, because what AI does, it just continuously breeds with itself. So eventually, especially as more people do hashtag no AI, it's no longer going to be able to point out new things. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see more like little concept art houses and different types of production companies that their job is to make content for the AI.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, I think I will touch on AI really quick because it's a point that I want people to hear. I think AI does belong. Petunio, for instance, says there's no room for any asset by AI in the pipeline. I think it does one way or another, for better or worse, for good or bad. I'm not saying that this is like what I agree with. I think one way or another, AI is a part of the pipeline already at the majority of companies and will only become more so. So I think by resisting the use of AI, you're falling behind a little bit personally. I think there are ethical places to use it. One of my favorite examples, actually, in the art field was from the last episode, where somebody mentioned making a model themselves, training up an AI on their art, and then having that AI take their model that they had created and make a couple alternatives for them. So, like, that's an example. That's an ethical use of AI. That's super cool, also. And I think it can fit. I, as a designer, love using AI as sort of like a workshop agent. We like sit down and brainstorm together, kind of. And then it doesn't actually make any assets, but I shoot the shit with it. It's like a more efficient search engine or something. Anyway, wanted to touch on it. So that's interesting. Art houses obviously have been a thing for a while. So are air quotes engineering houses. Nobody calls them that, but places that you go to for extra engineering help. I don't know that I've seen any that are like design houses, like they design interesting systems for you and output a bunch of cool specs or something. But that actually kind of excites me because that still, I think, is within people's control. They can form something like that. Rick in the chat here even did that for himself. That's how he's employed, doing that kind of thing. And it's a little bit more stable than like a true gig where you're just a self-employed agent. I guess maybe could you give us a little bit of perspective into how somebody might start something like that or join something like that?
Well, as far as joining it, I mean, there's job like they post on ArtStation. Tomahawk recently had a couple of job postings about that.
Hmm.
So the nice thing about art houses is they already exist. It's already
Hmm.
standard. As about starting something like that, you have to have a client base. So I'm going to butcher his last name. So I'm just going to say Google Trent on YouTube. He is a former concept artist at Riot Games,
Hmm.
and he also worked for Blizzard. And he's the owner of Aquatic Moon. And so the reason that he was able to go and start that is because he worked for multiple game companies. He was already a successful concept artist. He published his first comic book at the age of 17.
Hmm.
Um, so he was already so established that he could kind of knew how the gig-based industry worked.
Hmm.
And when you think about it, that's what a design agency does. Let's get really outside of our industry for a second. That's what a law office does. Like people come in, they need something done, and you have specific people there that you can assign those cases to them. And when you think about it, you see these smaller companies doing ports for other games, right? That games
Yeah.
are in already existence.
And
That's the
working on
same
some
kind of
really
idea.
big titles as well. Yeah.
Exactly. And then that helps them fund their more individual projects.
Hmm.
And even now, Aquatic Moon just released a Metroidvania, like last week, I think. So they have moved from just making art for other companies to now they're an indie game studio.
Wow. That's really cool. I have it does feel like the majority of indie studios that succeed on a long-term basis, like 10-year plus survivor rate, had some other form of bringing in money other than
Yeah.
pure game sales. There's I give a talk on starting a studio, and I have 4 examples there, and only one of the examples that I like to give, just because they're good examples for various reasons. Only one of the 4 is actually like straight up game revenue that provided for him, and that one guy is a solo dev, and that's part of why straight game revenue worked for him, because he simply has lower expenses than a larger studio. All right, I've got one more question. I'm monetizing your time a little bit, but that's or not monetizing, monopolizing, because it's good stuff. But we're going to get to the community questions in just a second. My last question for you is pre-production. You've mentioned pre-production a couple of times now. And for different departments, it looks like different things. For us game designers, it's largely like prototyping and iteration, or at least the heaviest iteration of the entire production process. What does pre-production look like for artists, and what can you hand some of the listeners here, what should your artists or you as an artist have ready by the end of pre-production before you kick off and start building the game for real?
I'm so excited to talk about this because there were some things that I learned significantly actually being in the industry. There's a lot of misconceptions out there. So traditionally, when we tell artists starting out their art idea, they do have to do a lot of sketches. And one of the things that will make them do are these things called silhouette sketches, which is where you're just looking at the shapes so all of your characters are readable at a glance. It's an assignment in every school. It's students hate it. I hate doing it. And one of the things that it's still a good exercise. You should practice doing that. But people rarely do it in the industry. You need things to read at the sketch level. You're going to iterate very quickly. So you're going to do, I usually do about 10 sketches per concept. Somewhere between 8 to 10 sketches. And you start out with a whole bunch of reference gathering, which is another big misconception I think people have. There's no such thing as original ideas in 2025. There's no such thing as artists drawing without a reference. DeviantArt lied to you. You need to gather references so you can work quickly and show your boss or your supervisor or client, hey, is this kind of what you're going for? Is this the vibe that you need? And you may have multiple mood boards for one concept, and you're going to iterate over and over on the same idea very quickly. Like I'm talking about within an hour. And so that's one thing that's really important. Stuff needs to read you start out with the mood board. You're gonna iterate on the same idea over and over. There are thousands and thousands of ways to do a sea captain. So you're gonna have to show a variety of options to choose from. And the big thing that I think that I learned is things need to read at the sketch level. You do not have time to render things as a beautiful art piece. Color isn't even necessary until maybe later on in the process because they need to see your ideas first. And
That's interesting.
Yeah. Ideas start with readability. If it doesn't read at a sketch level, there's no point in putting it in color.
Really, so as a designer, one of the things that we talk about is the game should be fun at its core loop first. And if it's not fun there, if the most basic action I'm doing every day, planting, watering, and then harvesting my crops, whatever it might be for that game, if that's not fun in and of itself, regardless of every other thing you might tack on, upgrades and enemies and whatever else, then the whole game won't be fun, period. So this is sort of the equivalent. Like if it isn't readable at the sketch level, no matter how much you dress it up, it's just not going to work very well. So same thing here, maybe.
Absolutely. I mean, game design is design, right? So when you're thinking about the art level, it's a design process. So it's very, very similar. I think one of the differences when it's pure art is one, you got to make it is those aesthetics, right? It has to look cool and it has to be clear. It has to communicate clearly. And you do need that artist hand and be able to incorporate your artist hand quickly. Like you're going to be hired off of your visuals alone and sometimes not get gigs because of your visuals alone.
Amazing. All right, let's jump into some community questions. So the first few are very specific and technical. So we're going to do kind of rapid fire version.
Okay.
We'll do like 3 or so rapid fire and then we'll have a more in-depth question. All right. First question from Allie. Do you have any suggestions for making orthographic character sheets less overwhelming?
Ooh, this actually ties back to Procreate. So one of the great advantages that Procreate has over Photoshop, this is also true for Clip Studio Paint if you want to use it on your PC, is that they have perspective tools. So they have isometric perspective built in automatically. So when you draw, it will automatically snap your lines into the correct isometric view. So you're not just like stressing out, being like, is my perspective correct? It
All right.
it is the best.
That sounds awesome. I'm gonna have to check out Procreate. Once again, I don't really like visually art, but still, I'm gonna try it out. I've never used Procreate before. All right, next one. Quick technical question from Alec: Are you able to make 4K textures in Procreate?
Yeah, because 4K is just a resolution.
Hmm.
So, and you absolutely can make 4K textures. You can make 4K textures anywhere.
Yes.
Oh, that's actually another thing I wanted to talk about. You can also do photogrammetry on your iPad. So if you wanted 4K hyper realistic textures of an orange crate,
Ooh.
and just bring an orange crate in your kitchen and do that.
Who's making the next hyper realistic Skyrim mod? All right, Roberto. Last very quick technical question: Have you ever used Cinema 4D, and what do you think of it?
So Cinema 4D is more for motion graphics.
Hmm.
I touched Cinema 4D when it was born because I love After Effects. But as far as using it as a modeling thing, most people I know that use Cinema 4D will model something somewhere else and then do their motion graphics. Or if it's just motion graphics, then they'll do it all in Cinema 4D.
Hmm.
So, what do I think of it? It's cute. It's not really relevant to what I do. So I
Hmm.
don't use it that much, but I think it's a great 3D motion graphics tool.
Awesome. All right. So we have our first more in-depth question. We've got Rick up on stage, our chief question asker here at the Indie Game Lunch Hour. Rick, would you like to hit us with your first question?
Yeah. So you mentioned that you are a professor at Wake Tech Community College. I'm curious about the program that you have set up. How do you define the persona of your incoming students, and how have they grown after they've completed your program?
So when students first come to our program, one of the things that I specifically love about my program is like so many of our students are here for a second degree or have already had a whole life and are doing something else. And so fortunately for us, we get a lot of students like a big range of students everywhere from straight out of school to I've wanted to be a game developer my whole life and I never did and now I'm doing it.
Mhm.
But I think everyone coming in, regardless of their age, life experience, is like, well, I like to play games. Let's try making them. It can't be too involved, right? That's one of the things that they
Games are
on the
easy. They're fun. It's not that
right. Like, yes,
complicated.
doesn't that sound like a fun job?
Hmm.
Little
And
coding and drawing.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I mean, it can't be that hard.
For
Look at
anyone
it.
who's thinking about moving into games and doesn't know about game dev yet, it is quite literally the most complicated technical system you can make. Maybe different ways of different levels of complication in other departments, like if we're doing some analytical bank software or something that might be really number crunchy or something. But as far as all of the different elements that come together to make one piece of technology, games are easily the most complicated thing that we as humans build. They're pretty wild.
Absolutely. And there's so many different facets, and each one of those facets is just as complicated. Uh,
Yeah.
and that one of the things that we always laugh about is that we're a 2-year program, right?
Hmm.
So we're like in character development, I teach character development, and I don't get to teach marvelous designer, which is a type of costume fabric. You wouldn't call it modeling, but basically it's what you use to put costumes on characters for games, and it is a
Hmm.
character industry standard. I don't have time to teach them marvelous designer. That like just marvelous designer is enough to be 2 different classes. And so we laugh at how much of our students have to learn on their own, and
Hmm.
that's what they are when they get out of here. And I think that they have I'm going to just say it, they have an advantage that a lot of other students do in different programs don't have. They are self-learners. They have all touched both Unreal, Unity, have made stuff in both of them. Even our programmers have to take 3D modeling. They understand every single avenue of game development, from QA, from production, from documentation, from art making, from programming. Every one of our students.
Hmm.
And so each one of our students goes from making games, that sounds like fun, to let's go. This is tough, but I can do it. I could be a one-person studio if I really needed to.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so it
And
sounds
that's
like you turn them into generalists where they may not have all of their skills fully realized, but they've broken their learning curve, and they would then feel confident to keep learning on their own.
Mm-hmm.
That's very true. And that's one thing. It's funny that you bring the word generalist up because I worry about that. Because right now, the game industry, you have to be a specialist.
Mm-hmm.
Like you've heard me talk about 3D stuff a lot throughout this conversation because 3D pays the bills. But to be a successful concept artist, you have to focus on just concept art. And so when I first started, anytime I had free time outside of work, I was working on that. And I still do that. I go home and I do a gesture drawing at least every single day.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one of the things that we really encourage our students to do. And we actually try to get them to start specializing while they're still in our program. So they have to choose between whether they want to be an environment artist or if they want to be a character artist. They can either take one or the other for a requirement, etc.
Yeah,
Really interesting.
but the specializing versus generalizing, I have noticed that people tend to do really well if they understand the roles that they are interacting with. So people who
Mm-hmm.
are pure specialists who don't understand how everything is interconnected do tend to struggle.
I
Yet you
completely
have more
agree.
value in the connective tissue players.
My favorite
Absolutely.
like framework there has always been the T-shaped experience, where at the top of the top line of the T, I've got a little bit of experience in every department. I can understand and conceptualize every department, but then I have a deep level of understanding in just my department. That I think is the best way to be, where I can talk to everybody and I know what the hell you're saying, but I'm not an expert there. I'm an expert here. All right. Thank you, Rick, for that first question. I'm going to throw us an interesting one. We'll do maybe two more. 316 asks, I'm making a board game that could translate into a video game. Would that be a good idea to do as the multimedia approach?
I think you could, that absolutely. And the nice thing about translating a board game to a video game is that you have more accessibility.
Mm-hmm.
But I am going to point out that board games on Kickstarter are like one of the leading things. Like they dominate the Kickstarter space. I'm pretty sure the most successful Kickstarter in history was a board game, wasn't it?
Not anymore. It was,
Not
but then
anymore.
Brandon Sanderson, the man, the myth, the legend, absolutely blew it out of the water. It
Yes.
used to be Frosthaven, though, and I think Frosthaven is still maybe number three or four. Yeah.
Okay. Either way, you may want to consider are you ready to translate that into a video game? You
Yeah.
may want to really push and ride the board game train. I mean, you can even go to these cute little board game, like they have all these board game shops and bars and things like that where people get together and play. I mean, you could just have it out. It's hard.
Mm-hmm.
That's harder to do with a video game.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I have a lot of thoughts on this one myself. I think, especially if you are earlier in your career, so you are figuring things out, I actually don't think I'd recommend a multimedia approach unless you're already extremely competent somewhere. So maybe you're already a comic artist and you can bang out a good comic without much skill, and this is not without much skill, without much time invested. And now you're making a video game for the first time. Then I might do a multimedia. You drop the video game and you make a cool comic for it. If you are figuring both of those things out, if you're like, oh, I'm going to figure out how to make a board game and I'm going to figure out how to make a video game, I think you're only going to do both kind of meh. And so I wouldn't recommend it. What you can do is make a multimedia franchise, which everybody's trying to do right now. But basically that means drop one release and then the other later. So you're building an audience for both. The Nicholas Gurley, who used to be our chief of product here, actually did exactly that. So he just dropped a board game on Kickstarter. They successfully funded, and that's going to turn into video games later, but not at the same time. That's what I have to say about that. All right, last question for you from Alec. I'm a 2D artist, but I want to get into 3D modeling. To get a decent industry job, do I need to understand all of the standard 3D programs, or can I just get good at ZBrush and be set?
So no, you do not need to understand all the 3D programs. However, you do not want to start with ZBrush. Because there is also this stigma where among 3D artists where people just do sculpts in ZBrush and they don't know anything about topology. Typology is the most important thing. So I would say start in Blender or Maya first. And I have to say Maya because I love Maya, and so I just want to mention it.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Okay. Well, we're at the end of the episode. So before we say goodbye, we've had a bunch of recommendations for great tools as well as great approaches on how to become a better artist and do it on a budget. Before we say goodbye, though, we like to do two things here. The first thing is always some homework. So what is something, Ryan, that the audience can do in the next week or so? It'll take them about an hour or so to help them practice some of what we talked about here.
Would love for you guys to do something that we all just love doing. Come up with a game idea. But the game idea that I want you to come up with is something that you could complete on $0 and do in a weekend. And
That's
you're
awesome.
yeah. It's not gonna be easy, but you can do it. Come up. Use that big brain.
So the homework is to come up with a game idea that you can build on $0 in one weekend. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Amazing.
And y'all guys are going to find that one of the big places you have to spend money is where the heck are you going to put the thing?
Yes.
So you got to think about that too.
Itch.io is your friend. That's sort of the most straightforward, approachable place these days. But there's plenty of other places too. One of the ones that's been interesting, it's been kind of making a comeback, is self-releases. So people will put their games on their own website, and that's the only place you can get it. Kind of interesting.
I love that.
Yeah, but then you got to market it yourself and everything. So, give and take. All right. And the very last thing. So your homework for those who are listening is to come up with a game idea that you can build in one weekend that will cost you $0 to release. That one's an easy one. That was a fun one. So I want everybody in this room to do this. You have no excuse for not doing it. Post it to LinkedIn for us. You can tag Ryan Grady as well as myself, Willem Delventhal, or the Indie Game Academy. We'll comment on it and be like, "Ooh, cool." And if you're feeling insecure about releasing it on LinkedIn, though you shouldn't, you can drop it just inside the Discord. Links to join down below. All right. Before we say goodbye, Ryan, do you have any last words of wisdom or anything you would like to plug here at the end of the episode?
Make sure. Plug. I'm making an indie game. We're making an indie game. Lythe The Forgetful Witch. You should go check it out. Follow us on social media. And also, if you haven't made something today, you need to go into the studio and make stuff.
I love it. What was the name of the indie game? We'll drop it. We'll drop a link.
Lythe The Forgetful Witch. The demo is out on Steam. It's visual novel, but more point and clicky.
Okay.
So.
Lythe The Forgetful Witch. That's Lythe.
Lythe.
All right. I've dropped the link in the chat there. And for anyone who is listening, there will be a link down in the description to Lythe The Forgetful Witch. I'm going to promo you this weekend. So only for those who are listening live. This weekend, we're also hiring on Ryan to do one of our masterclasses. So if you want to spend 4 hours getting lots of goodness from Ryan on specifically visual art in games, come and join us this weekend. We'd love to have you there. All right. I think that's it, Ryan. Is there anything else you want to say? I love the concept of just straight up get in the studio and make stuff.
That's what I'm going to leave it as. Get in the studio and make stuff. We all need to do that.
I love it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. If you're feeling down, just make stuff. All right. Goodbye, everybody. It's been a lovely episode of the show. We'll see you again next week. As always, we're here every single Wednesday, 12 p.m. Eastern time in the Discord. You can join with links down below. Bye, everybody. Have a great day.
Game over.